The truth about San Quentin's death row life in a timeless prison. Before we begin, if you're drawn to the darkest truths, the stories that don't let you sleep, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment now. Because once you step inside the story, there's no easy way out. The night the siren screamed along the edge of San Francisco Bay, San Quentin was already awake. Guards flooded East Block after a frantic radio call crackled through the prison. An inmate on death row had collapsed inside his cell, unresponsive, eyes open, staring at nothing. The cell door clanged open, boots echoed on concrete, and for a moment, time seemed to stop, just like it always does here. The man on the floor was Marcus Hale, condemned 27 years earlier for a double murder that shook Northern California. He was supposed to die years ago. Instead, like hundreds of others on San Quentin's death row, he waited, and waited, and waited. Now he was barely breathing. As medics worked, investigators noticed something strange. Hale's wrists showed no signs of self-harm. No overdose. No fight. Yet his cellmate, an inmate housed across the tier, kept repeating the same sentence under his breath. He finally figured it out. Over and over again. San Quentin State Prison has always been a place where answers come slow. Built in 1852, it became California's execution center, first with the gas chamber, later lethal injection. But by the early 2000s, execution stalled. Appeals stacked up. In 2006, a federal court ruled the system broken. Too cruel, too chaotic. Death row became a waiting room with no clock. Detective Laura Kincaid arrived before sunrise. She'd worked murders on the outside, but this was different. Every suspect was already locked up. Every witness had nothing left to lose. She walked past rows of tiny cells, each no bigger than a parking space, each holding a man who had been sentenced to die decades earlier. Some had gone gray waiting. Some had gone mad. Hale's prison file raised immediate questions. Evidence from his original trial had been challenged, missing records, recanted testimony, a key witness who later vanished. Rumors had followed him for years. That he knew something. That he was bargaining for time. Then a guard handed Kincaid a folded note found hidden beneath Hale's mattress. 3 words were written in shaky ink. They lied. All of them. And tucked behind the note was a date, just 2 days away. But when investigators checked the prison schedule, their blood ran cold. Because that date wasn't a court hearing. It was an execution date that officially didn't exist anymore. By morning, San Quentin felt tighter, quieter, like the walls themselves were listening. Word of Marcus Hale's collapse spread fast along East Block. Men who hadn't spoken in years leaned toward their cell doors, whispering. In a place where days blend together, anything unusual becomes dangerous. Detective Laura Kincaid stood inside the prison's administration wing, staring at the execution schedule pinned to the wall. Officially, California had no active executions. Appeals, lawsuits, and court orders had frozen the process for years. Yet the date in Hale's note matched an internal transport log, sealed, restricted, and never meant to leave this building. Someone had been planning something. Hale survived the night, but slipped into a coma. Doctors said it wasn't poison, not exactly. His body showed signs of extreme stress, dehydration, and long-term psychological breakdown. Like a man who's been waiting for something unbearable, one physician said quietly. Kincaid returned to East Block, where the air smelled of disinfectant and old metal. She stopped at the cell of Jonah Pike, the inmate who'd been muttering after Hale collapsed. Pike had been on death row for 34 years, longer than most guards had been alive. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He figured it out, didn't he? Kincaid asked. Pike smiled thinly. Figured out that time doesn't move in here. It circles. Comes back around. Pike explained that Hale had spent months digging through old case law, prison memos, and archived execution protocols. Not for appeals, but for patterns. Names of inmates who died quietly. Heart failures. Sudden illnesses. Men whose deaths never made headlines. They weren't executed, Pike whispered. They were erased. As Kincaid pressed for details, a guard rushed in. Surveillance footage from East Block had gone missing, only 1 hour erased. The hour before Hale collapsed. No technical failure. No explanation. Then another blow landed. A retired San Quentin guard, Frank Morrow, had been found dead in his home across the bay. Apparent suicide. But on his kitchen table lay a stack of old prison documents, execution chamber maintenance logs from the 1990s. Hale's name was circled in red. Kincaid began to see the shape of something terrifying. If Hale was right, then San Quentin wasn't just a place where time stood still, it was a place where justice quietly bent. Where unofficial decisions were made in shadows. Where waiting too long could be fatal. Before she could leave the prison, lockdown alarms blared. Cells slammed shut. Over the loudspeaker came a code Kincaid had never heard before. An inmate was missing. Not escaped.
Gone.
And the last recorded location was the unused corridor leading to the old gas chamber, sealed decades ago, or so everyone believed. As Kincaid stared down that dark hallway, she realized the truth was closer than she ever imagined. And if she didn't move fast, someone else on death row wouldn't survive long enough to tell it. The corridor to the old gas chamber felt colder than the rest of San Quentin, as if the concrete remembered what had happened there. Detective Laura Kincaid walked past rusted warning signs and flaking paint, escorted by 2 armed guards who clearly did not want to be there. Official records said this wing had been sealed since lethal injection replaced gas. Unofficially, everyone knew San Quentin never truly closed its past. The missing inmate was identified as Raymond Cruz, 68 years old, on death row since 1989. Cruz had no history of escape attempts. He walked with a limp. He could barely climb stairs. Yet his cell had been found open, his restraints neatly placed on the bunk, as if he had left willingly. Inside the abandoned corridor, investigators discovered fresh footprints in decades-old dust. The trail led to a steel door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Behind it, the power was on. The chamber wasn't operational, but it wasn't dead either. Lights hummed. A ventilation fan turned slowly. And on a metal table nearby lay a clipboard with recent timestamps. Someone had been using this place. Not for executions, but for meetings. Quiet ones. Off the books. Kincaid's phone buzzed. The prison hospital was calling. Marcus Hale had regained consciousness. When she reached his bedside, Hale looked smaller than he had in the photographs, frail, hollow-eyed, but alert. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "They don't kill you," he whispered. "They wait. They watch. And if you become a problem, they make you disappear." Hale explained that Cruz had uncovered evidence linking multiple unexplained death row fatalities to internal reviews never disclosed to defense attorneys. Men whose appeals were gaining traction. Men who had started asking questions. The system didn't execute them, it outlasted them. Before Hale could say more, a nurse interrupted. A lockdown had just been lifted. A body had been found. Raymond Cruz was discovered in a storage room beneath the old execution wing. No signs of violence. Cause of death: cardiac arrest. Another quiet ending. Another line item no one would question. But this time, Kincaid noticed something different. Tucked into Cruz's prison uniform was a scrap of paper, torn from a legal pad. Written in careful block letters were names, guards, administrators, and one retired official already dead. At the bottom was a final message. "If you're reading this, it's already happening again." As Kincaid left the prison that night, she realized the danger had shifted. This was no longer about solving an old crime. It was about exposing a system designed to erase its own mistakes. And somewhere inside San Quentin, someone knew she was getting close. Too close. By the time dawn broke over San Francisco Bay, San Quentin was no longer just a prison to Detective Laura Kincaid. It was a crime scene stretched across decades. The list found on Raymond Cruz had cracked something open. Names matched internal reports, sealed disciplinary hearings, and medical reviews that never reached the courts. Men didn't die here by execution anymore. They died by delay, pressure, silence. Kincaid pushed for warrants.
Phones were seized.
Emails recovered. What surfaced wasn't a secret death squad, but something colder and more disturbing, a quiet internal policy born after execution stalled. When appeals threatened to expose flawed convictions, certain inmates were flagged as high risk to the institution. Transfers were delayed. Medical care slowed. Mental health requests buried in paperwork. Time did the rest. San Quentin didn't kill them. It let them wait until their bodies or minds gave out. The final confrontation came in a closed-door meeting with senior prison officials. One administrator finally broke. "We were never ordered to kill anyone," he said. "We were told not to rush. The system favors patience. In a place where time stands still, patience becomes a weapon." Marcus Hale was the last piece. His case files were reopened under public pressure. Evidence mishandled decades earlier was suddenly impossible to ignore. A witness recanted. A timeline collapsed. After 27 years on death row, Hale's conviction was overturned, not declared innocent, but no longer certain enough to justify death. Hale left East Block alive. But justice didn't come clean. No arrests were made inside San Quentin. Policies were revised. Language softened. Responsibility dissolved into committees and procedure. Officially, no wrongdoing was admitted. Unofficially, transfers began. Files disappeared. The prison moved on the way it always had. Months later, Kincaid stood outside the gates, watching another transport bus roll in. New inmates. New sentences. New years added to the waiting room of death. San Quentin remained open. East Block still held men who had arrived before smartphones existed, before their children were born, before the world outside changed beyond recognition. Some would die here without a needle, without gas, without headlines, just quietly, over time. The public would remember the famous names, the statistics, the court rulings. But the truth was harder to face. In this prison, time is the sentence, and it always has been. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.